Hello, everyone, and welcome to State of the Realm. We're wrapping up our Dawntrail speculation just under a week out from our combat live letter, getting a whole bunch of new information. And we're going to combine tanks and healers today. Some of you may be triggered to hear this, but the support role, as we tend to call it in Raid. So I expect we'll have a fun amount of discussion, given how tank and healer discussion has gone all throughout Endwalker. But anyway, I'm one of your hosts, Mr. Happy. Of course, joining me is Sly. How you doing, Sly?
I'm great, Happy. You know what? I just realized yesterday with the whole SMT complete guide.
Okay,
it's not enough. It's not enough.
No? Okay. Well, that's too bad for you.
Fuck.
That's too bad for you. It's enough for me because I'm not playing it. All right. Have fun, Sly. All right.
One day.
One day. Now, of course, Sly and I are not tank or healer specialists. We dabble. I dabble especially more in healer than tank. But, you know, we figured we should probably bring on some guests for that. You know, it's probably not a bad idea. So, for our healer aficionado, although I know for a fact they've also dabbled in tank plenty, we have Kio. How you doing, Kio?
Hello.
Kio.
Hi.
No, Hi's not here.
No, he's not. You're right.
No,
just
you're right.
me.
Yeah, just you. Yeah. Listen, we can't escape it, Sly. I have to do it. And as our tank aficionado, I don't know how much they've dabbled in healer. We have Sindalf.
Hi.
Hi.
I did a prog tier on healer.
Which one?
Titan. Back in the day.
You mean
Eden's
Eden
Gate?
Titan?
Yeah.
Eden's
Gate.
Gate.
Yeah. I played healer for that tier.
That's a pretty okay one to get in on as healer. There's some tight moments in there a little bit, especially at the end. That's got to be a fun one to do as a healing tier.
It was fun. It was just I was kind of surprised because I didn't really get to. I've wanted to try healing at some point, and I needed a raid group, and I just got a message out of nowhere by like Layla Bell. He's like, "Hey, you want to come heal for us?" And I'm like, very confused by this. I'm like, yes, sure. I'm definitely down for that.
That just also meant that you were in all of the videos showing off the slow instance timer. Smile. Yeah, I mean the fast one.
We would have probably been. I sound like a broken record when I say this, but we would have won that tier if that didn't happen. We had a sub 1% wipe before, like 2 hours before World First, with a fast instance.
Yeah, it was like 6 seconds difference, wasn't it?
It was like 10, I think, earlier.
Oh my
so it's
God.
weird. So that was like 10. So most of the time it'd be like, I think 1320, and then it's intended to be 1330. But you go back there and it's like 1339, 1340. I don't completely understand what happened. I would love to know more from a technical standpoint, but Square Enix will never give us that info.
No, but we all have the evidence it happened for real. So, broken record all you want about it.
I was told it's coming back on the cloud servers.
No, stop.
Don't know how true that is.
Moving on. Nope. Never bring it back. Never bring back slow fast. Nope. Don't allow it. Nope. All right. Before we get started, quick shout out to our sponsors over on Patreon for supporting. They don't have to. They choose to. All our content's available for free on YouTube and your favorite podcasting format. So if you just listen to it on like an audio platform or something, whether it be SoundCloud or something through the RSS feed, it's available. It's on Spotify even. I kind of forgot I added it to Spotify ages ago. It just gets updated and it's just there. So, you know, it's pretty much everywhere you want to be. So enjoy and enjoy this conversation. Now, okay, we've done all the DPS at this point, and there's been a lot of contention in every episode about what could happen. Before we get into any specifics about the specific tanks, specific healers, about the roles, do you feel like there's a lot of apprehension when it comes to the tanks and healers? I'll let you two determine which one you want to go first. You two are used to talking in groups at the same time. You guys have the dynamic.
And we both started the same time. Go ahead, Sindal.
Well, let's say for tanks, a lot of people, they've been in Doomium mode since Endwalker. Like a lot of players that I know, which usually, to be fair, are a lot of the older players who have been playing since Heaven's Ward and like ARR and all that stuff. And the tanking was just a whole different game back then. You had tank stance to manage. You had with aggro, DPS stance, all sorts of stuff like that. More positioning that needed to be done, moving around the boss, and they removed pretty much all of that. Probably to make the pug scene and barrier of entry much easier, but in doing so, you've kind of become the blue DPS that occasionally hits your mitigation, and since they're really spreading out where your where your damage is, you kind of ignore that in most fights. Like, you see cast bar, you press buttons randomly, you don't even have a plan. So I would say, how do you get worse from here?
I mean, that's what I was going to say too. So it's along the same vein as supports in general have been simplified over the years. Every expansion, it feels like we lose a level of complexity. And I think that's the main doomer thought is like, how are we going to lose any more? Are we down to 1-button damage rotations on healer, or do we get to keep our 2-button one for the expansion? But yeah, it's like even when it comes to tanks, like for example, one of the things we lost not that long ago was untelegraphed tank busters, which was an original level of like planning and complexity that tanks now, for the most part, don't have to deal with. It just doesn't exist anymore.
That's always a fun one when you take someone who is like a Shadowbringer's baby and you do either mid-item level old stuff or low-item level old stuff, and then they just get fucking slapped 2 seconds into the fight by an instant cast. They're just like, I guess I got to learn that now.
That is exactly what happened to us. We went into turn 9 Savage. And,
that's the slap I was thinking of.
That's the good one, yeah.
Right within like the first 20 seconds, or like actually, there's like 3 busters or something in the first 30 seconds of the fight.
My favorite one is Final Coil Kalia, the second fight.
Oh yeah,
Hydra. That's my favorite one. Just the first, it's auto cleave dead. Just you're done. First 2 hits. It's great.
The auto during the cleave also. It's auto, and then the cleave waits just long enough to sneak an auto during the cleave. So it's, even though you only see this once, there's an extra one in there, and then you're just done. You're just done. So
that one was particularly nefarious because it was also a mechanic. It was resonance is meant to be stacked with 2 tanks. So, but when you pull, you're not in position yet, so you tended to eat that first one solo and just get blasted. It was great.
Already such a boomer episode. All right, yeah, like it took no time at all to get to the boomer.
Back in Murdy.
We can't talk about what we're our aspirations, hopes, and fears for the expansion is without looking at what we've lost in the past and like how the kits have changed over the expansions, because there's trends here and it's going to probably continue with the same trends. So we look at what we expect based on what happened before. And, you got to look back a little bit.
In the past, there was a lot of trade-off gameplay, especially for the tanks, where you had to make a decision that could be different per group that you're running with and what your group wants to plan and based off your cooldowns. Like example, with the tank stance and DPS stance, a big thing with that, if you played something like Warrior, is that you had the option between Inner Beast for mitigation and healing, or you would use Fell Cleave, which was more damage. And I believe it was 20 or 25% damage different. Losing for going into tank stance, DPS stance gave you 5%, so it's like not only a potency difference, but a 30% like pure damage difference. Something significant like that. Nowadays, if you were to use a DPS ability that said, "Oh, you're going to do less damage, but maybe you'll get a little bit of healing out of it," players would look at you funny and just be like, "Huh? What are you doing? You're just taking the loss."
Even from the boomer days, it's a lot. I think all the way back to Realm Reborn boomer days, watching the turn 5 world first, just waiting for damage to happen. No arrows, no stones, nothing. Just very different.
I mean, and we could talk a little bit about that. A lot of people talk about like, oh, healers just didn't know how to do damage back then, but it was actually more about the MP than it was anything else back then. If you're spamming damage, you just yourself, and then you couldn't deal with mechanics anymore. So
Yep.
you just didn't cast for the MP safety.
Yeah, it wasn't really till second coil, Savage, and final coil people finally went.
If you snapshotted in time the FCOB like Scholar optimization where people were doing good damage on Scholar, and you asked them to add low, you just watch the chaos that ensued as their MP just bottoms out and they couldn't do anything anymore because they're running on like 1/4 MP the whole time because they're just spamming casts. It was a problem.
Yeah. Now,
so
go Sindalf.
yeah. So something that I like to bring up a lot with that change with like what Kio mentioned earlier, what you and Kio were mentioning about how the healer wasn't healed, like just they weren't doing damage, they were waiting to heal, and the tank having the trade-off is what that's kind of also done to the current content in the game. For balance purposes, we've had, in my opinion, harder DPS checks than ever before. Partly because you now have to factor in a guaranteed amount of healer and tank damage. In the past, like if you were just doing on the tank side, you had that tank stance and DPS stance. SC is not going to expect you to be in full tank stance all the time. That's not happening. They also are not going to expect you to be in full DPS stance. That is also not happening because you will just die. So where you are expected to do damage is going to be somewhere in between there. But if you're in between, but where is that number? We don't really know. So that means every moment that you can push out being in DPS stance is a gain. Like doing more than Square Enix originally expected you to do, so then you're even closer to beating that check. Likewise, if you can find a situation where you can put up mitigation and both your healers are now doing damage and you're doing your 1-2-3 rotation, that is also probably a gain over something else. So there's like this weird dynamic between the healers and the tanks that you had to like consider when meeting a check that sometimes just required like either a healer or a tank to pay attention to the other players in their role and just make a decision on what they want to do based off what they're seeing. And that would end up being kind of like these unspoken gains that you would gain throughout a fight, especially in a prog scenario.
Right, but Endwalker is the first expansion where that has been significantly less important.
I'd say
because
Shadowbringers.
It did, but it's more pronounced even more now in Endwalker with the 1.5 second cast time on healers. It used to be back in even Shadowbringers. That's not that long ago. Healers all, except for Astro, had 2.5 second cast times on their main damage ability. So anytime they healed, they were losing damage. They'd have to clip their GCD, or they'd have to weave it in once every 30 seconds on their dot. With a couple of exceptions, like White Mages using lilies and stuff like that. But for the most part, like, it mattered more. These days, everything is free. You lose nothing. So it's even less impactful than it was before.
Now, of course, there's been one important bit of discussion with Dawntrail in particular. One that's been, as many people can probably acknowledge, overblown in the idea of bringing back a little bit more in terms of some of the things they took away. Now, hitboxes were a mention, obviously, massive hitboxes. Melee's looking at that a little scared, but I'm sure more than anything, tanks are looking at that excitedly, more than anything else. So, Sindalf, where are you optimistic at least a little bit about the role as a whole with that regard coming back, at least that tiny bit?
Well, I would say, first off, the Melee should be excited for that. Well, everybody who plays Melee should be excited for it, because now that means if there's something like a chariot mechanic or like an out or something else, or you have to move the boss, there's actually optimization you can do on both roles of tank or anyone who plays Melee to actually keep your uptime, and that is going to be your partial form of skill expression. I'm optimistic that they'll do something to make this a little more interesting. Maybe not entirely in the first year. Maybe if we get something like P4S's hitbox in the door boss, that's a little more correct in where things should be. Not like what you see in something like P6S, where it's the entire room, but the person is super skinny. That makes no sense to me. It's so disorientingly large. Like, actually having to make decisions for your uptime really is just like, it's great in that regard. I don't know if SE is going to let us move the boss around that much, though. They did mention, I believe, around the same time that we are going to have a little more open-ended mechanics, it sounded like. And those are always great, especially in Prague. Caloric was one of those that was a lot of very open-ended. But if they say they're going to add more of them, that's good, because that means there are options to do. And one of those options is usually, how do you handle boss positioning? Where I think another good example of that is P3S with the Phoenix being able to, sometimes some players like to move the boss to the outside ring at the start of the fight, or put it in between at various points, or you could do what TPS did in the middle of Prague, keep that thing directly in the middle of the room so everybody exactly knows where it is. One of those is higher DPS than the other, but slightly more complex and has more room of error. One of the other is more consistent, and I would argue is a lot easier to handle any follow-up mechanics that the boss might randomly do. So which one is your group going to pick if they switch to that type of thing? And that's usually something the party chooses to do. But some people say, no, the tank just picks it, which I believe is wrong. Tank movement is partially a party decision, not a tank decision. There's the small bits of it is the tank decision, but the overall massive change you make is the party decision.
I wish that were the case. I
It is
really do, because
static.
most of the time it's just us really. I mean, most of the time I feel like, and groups I've been in, it's like, well, the tank kind of dictates the movement. I'm like, well, fuck it. Like, we'll adjust. You know, DPS adjust. It's fine. Great. You know. But like, yeah, I kind of agree with you that it should be a, you know, kind of a party decision on like where shit gets pulled and, you know, how positioning goes. I kind of agree with you on that regard.
You're a melee. You should agree. It affects you more than anyone.
Yeah.
Honestly, my experience is asking the melees first. The tank goes, so melees, if I do this, how does that affect you?
I wish our fucking tanks did that. It just usually Val's just pulling shit and we just go with it. It's like he'll adjust. He didn't adjust, Val.
See, now it sounds like you're talking. See, as a fizz range, this all you're describing to me, it sounds like fizz range is just like, yeah, that's what you guys want to do? All right.
Well,
I don't fucking care.
It's also important to that the melee speak up when there's something that they want changed for the tank stuff. Because the first thing the tank is going to do is try to satisfy the mechanic and make sure nobody dies. Yeah. And if nobody says anything, they're probably going to do the same thing again. So as a melee, if you do not speak up and ask for a change, you're not going to get it. At least that's how it is with me. Okay. So I want my melee, if my melee don't say anything and they're getting like losing GCDs or getting in the way of something, well, that's their fault for not saying anything. I don't know what you're doing. Do you have True North? I don't know. Are you playing Ninja and doing some range stuff at that point? I don't know. It's not my problem. That's yours.
I'm just looking forward to more options for Ray design. Like the first example that comes to mind is Pinax and boss movement in Pinax, being able to drag it to a wall between these colors or between those colors or living in the middle. Like, it just creates more options for Ray design that's interesting. And I feel like it was just we didn't need to lose that. I don't think it helped anything. So I'm really glad that they're bringing that back. It just gives us more things we can move around. And it's more interesting.
It's so funny you mentioned the communication thing, Sindalf, because I'm thinking of when you joined us for DSR, how we were used to the opposite, with one of our tanks never saying anything and just doing whatever we told them to do. And then you joined and you're like, why are you guys doing this? Be like, one of our tanks doesn't talk and the other doesn't do damage. So this is just what we landed on.
Well, I'm also okay with people just telling me what to do. If you just tell me what to do, I can do it. Most of the time.
But we were telling him to we were saying to do 2s during Nidhogg towers instead of waiting till they were done while he was also popping 5 cooldowns as a Dark Knight. So I feel like you might be less okay with that in that particular circumstance.
Not pressing all those cooldowns. That's actually something that they've done with tank as recently is there's a lot of damage sometimes, like towards the players themselves during a 2-minute window. And that is some of the skill expression that tanks have now is, and you burst correctly during that moment. And if you, unfortunately, some of them occasionally, I think there's one of them in P8S during the door boss, where if you actually wait until the cast bar, you're not getting your GCDs in unless you invuln. Even if you invuln, you might not get them all in. Especially if you're playing like Dark Knight, which becomes very off GCD law if you're trying to be like completely optimal and stuff like that. So then you have to make a decision. In this moment, do I risk it and maybe I'll live and get the extra damage, or do I press my cooldowns like I'm supposed to? You should press your cooldowns, but your parse might not like that very much.
Well, then I know what the party finder's picking.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of raids, a lot of Endwalker raids kind of, you know, kitchen sinked you during 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some brutal ones throughout Endwalker. Yeah. They're like, listen, we're not asking you to do much, but the one thing we ask you to do, we're not really asking. We're telling you what you got to do.
Yeah.
Like I remember first time getting the DSR dragons and just seeing what that's like without, like, that's a kitchen sink one big time. The dive at the end before they land, when you have to be on the sides. I was like, Jesus, are we sure that's a tank? Like, there were genuinely tons of tank busters where you actually just thought you were doing it wrong because you couldn't believe that the buster was actually demanding the amount of buff stacking that was needed in order to survive it.
I remember the P3, the phase 3 tank tethers. We were talking about, is this a party share? Is this like a dual tank suck? Like, why are these hitting so hard? It's just a tank buster.
The thing that's interesting about DSR to me is that fight, especially Double Dragons, or in release, was tuned so well. Normally, you can throw like, and this is still the case in that fight too, except for the dives at the end. You can throw like 40% on everything, and you will live. 30% is also okay as long as you have like one bit of reactive mit and stuff like that, and you will live. And that's even the case at certain parts of that fight with a 20 and something else. You'll live, but you'll live just barely. But the tank busters are spread out in such a timeline that it actually is pretty difficult to fit things in if you do the typical strategy of just throwing 1 to 2 things at everything. You actually have to only send 1. And what also makes this even harder is at least with the mitigation plan people use now, you have to do something extremely unintuitive, which is throw away your most powerful cooldown, your 30%, on an RNG buster that you might not get.
Yeah, phase 6.
Oh, is that the Hracefelger one?
The Worm's Breath one.
Yeah, the one that comes from Hrace, yeah.
Yeah, that one's very interesting because if you don't do that, then you're going to use it later. But now you're going to be going into that section at the end way more light. And the only way you can survive the dive, if you make it there, is with invuln. And so that is a forced invuln section at that point, which is, at least for a lot of groups, like, they don't really think about this anymore, because if you go to like PF, they'll have like spreadsheets and they'll tell you when to use your mit. But when we were learning that phase, that was actually probably one of the few times when I was like, if I was not on Dark Knight, I'm not entirely sure what I would do. This actually hurts, and they're spread out. It was one of those struggle points of that fight.
That was the first point in our prog where we had to spreadsheet the mit because we couldn't figure it out we couldn't just free ball it. It didn't work.
And you had to affect the previous phases too. You typically need to know, 2 to 4 minutes into the fight to actually know what cooldowns you need to press. If you don't know that, timeline, you're just kind of winging it until later. Which is why in Prague, I also pretty much never use my invuln. One, because I want to see more mechanics when we get there. But also because if there is a hole, I need to fill it somehow. And that's what the invuln does. But in DSR, I didn't want to do that because you always need your invuln in pretty much every ultimate for the final phase. So I'm thinking about these dives and I'm like, what do we do? Eventually we tried tank LBing because we didn't know the drop was... We didn't know it was a wild charge and we didn't know the drop was distance baited at the time. So tank LB was an option.
At least it sounds like, despite the doomium, that there was still at least the basics were still all there throughout most of Endwalker, and quite expressive, even compared to previous expansions at the very least.
Yeah, DSR I think did a lot of that right. A lot of players probably just don't realize it now when it's in farm mode, but DSR handled various sections, especially Double Dragon, very well. Top, not so much, except for maybe P6, you could say. That one actually requires you to plan, but that's a whole party-wide plan that everyone needs to be a part of. But DSR also has an extra factor in it, too. When you get hit by that buster from the, Worm's Breath, the animation it plays on your screen and the sound effects it makes always makes it sound like you wiped. So there's this extra anxiety to it. And what also makes this even worse is, as a tank, you sometimes want to act, because I remember asking this in Prague, am I too close to the party with where I'm standing? How much room is there? Because it does so many crazy effects on your screen, you cannot see it. And even if you could, unless you have an insane bitrate on your recording, that's going to be all pixelated. You're not going to be able to see it. The other players have to tell you if you are too close or not, and probably send you the screenshot of how far you are. There's no way you're figuring that out yourself very easily. So there's all sorts of all these aspects where it feels like you are not in control of this moment. And we are wiping and then audio cues of we are wiping every pool, but you're alive. And you just kind of got to get that out of your head and just continue, because anxiety kills fights, especially in ultimates.
Now, before we get on to talking about Dawntrail, I want to do one last thing in regards to Endwalker. Kio, one big thing they've made note of with healers is throwing in a MIT button on all of them, whether it be Aquavale or that's the only one's name I remember. I was like,
exaltation, protraction.
Yeah, there you go. So I knew you knew them all. I just didn't know them all. Do you think that that's at least been some degree of improvement? Have you felt more engaged at the very least in that part of the raid planning in terms of Endwalker, or has that just been another reason to not press your actual heals?
No, I think it's a good thing. I think it's sort of reminiscent of actually a Realm Reborn stone skinning tanks before busters. It has a similar feel of execution, and I did think that was a sad thing to lose back then. We kind of got it with Benison, but now it's universal across every healer, and I like that a lot, that we have this extra button. I think it was just generally a positive change across the board. And they kept them all unique too. They're all very unique buttons. They're not homogenized, which is great.
Just the implementation's homogenized, but not the effects, essentially.
Yeah, they're still slightly different. Like, for example, Scholar barely ever using it on tank busters because they use it to beef up their deploys instead is interesting. You can still use it for its purpose, which is the tank mitt, but it has this other use, which is, interesting.
Well, with that, I think using, DSR as the footnote, which to be fair is probably our best Endwalker footnote to talk about raid-wise. I think we've got most of our thoughts about how things are now. And we briefly already kind of touched on kind of hopes for Dawntrail, but now we kind of want to get into more specifics. We have 8 jobs between tank and healer, and I doubt we'll get to give all of them the attention that they want. So let's start with the 2 that you 2 want to talk about most. I know Sindalf is probably going to want to go into Dark Knight the most, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, Kio, are you going white mage, or because for me, I always think of you as a white mage player because of my time playing with you. Are you in a different camp at this point in regards to healer? Or are you just so flexible it doesn't matter?
In terms of what I'm playing for Dawntrail, I'm not locked in, but it probably white mage.
Okay.
It depends. But I think if I'm going to talk about a healer, I think right now Astro is the most interesting to talk about. But we'll get there, I'm sure.
All right. Well, it is the job. One of the jobs that we've known a rework is coming literally for 2.5 years, because it was supposed to happen in 6.1, and then they just said, never mind. What an edge job that is, to be like, yeah, here you go in 2 months, and like, wait 2 more years.
They do this every expansion. It feels like Astro just gets reworked and reworked again and again.
Yep.
I thought you were going to mean the
That
edge job
shit is-
thing, but that's different. Yeah. So optimism has not been high, Kio, on Astro.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. When it comes to Astro over the years, they have messed it up really bad several times. Where the first thing that comes to mind, the most recent, was actually Shadowbringers with sleeve draw and just the general like reworks to the class that made it feel really bad to use. It's just OGCD absolutely bloated and sort of unrewarding. For people that don't know, sleeve draw in Shadowbringers gave you 2 stacks of a buff that made it so when you drew a card, your draw would go on a 5-second cooldown, and you could use that. So you essentially draw 3 cards with sleeve draw, and each draw you then also had to use your minor arcana button to turn it into something that gave you a bigger boost, and then use it on a player. So every card was 3 OGCDs, and you had to use 3 of them rapid fire. And it was just this bloat. And then you also had divination in there as well. And God forbid you had to heal something. It was this mess that really felt bad to use.
Wasn't the opener like a 13 or like 18 off GCD perfect thing that you needed to pull off?
It was misery.
To even compete with white mage.
Yes, and that's the thing, is like they had this really awkward thing where like Astro had this bloat, and then white mage would push 3 buttons and do the same damage, and it was like, what is the point of all this extra work into a kit just to get the same results? It was a mess, and they keep changing. Every expansion is a dramatic overhaul, and now we're just getting the full blown rework. And fingers crossed to get it right this time.
When I played healer that tier at the beginning of Shadowbringers, I remember looking at Astro and like just pressing the buttons, because they changed how they moved the like draw and everything and play to 2 different buttons, which I hated with a passion. I'm like, why did you do this? And then at the same time, they couldn't queue properly on release. So if I remember right, the off GCDs didn't even work the way you typically expected them to. And it just felt so bad to play. Like, not even just the fact the class was weak in comparison or a little annoying. It just felt very unfun, that I'm more surprised that it made it past QA into release. And I just told my group, the class is max leveled. I'm not even going to practice this.
Yeah,
I'm playing white mage, and that's it.
It's one of those things where there was a big payoff if you got to be an expert at it, but the cliff that you had to climb for a small advantage was pretty bad design in general, as it was in Shadowbringers.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty big problem, I think, in Shadowbringers in general, even with the tanks. There's always something where like one class is really easy and the other one's harder, like Paladin versus Dark Knight. Dark Knight is, in my opinion, the easiest tank in the world to play. But Paladin at the time was like very complex, and you needed to just be like have like a PhD spreadsheet to even come close to the other classes. And Walker hasn't been that bad, and I'm hoping Dawntrail. I think for Dawntrail they'll be fine with this, because SC's been very good these past few years with their balancing. It's been better than it's ever been in the past, despite what some people think.
The cost of that has been steep, though.
Yes. Homogenization, less uniqueness of classes, nothing that really makes one class shine above the other. If they were to, I would love it if they were to bring some of that back. but I have a feeling they won't. It's unless they might do it if they add more raids to the game. Like instead of 4 per tier, maybe make it 6 or 8. If they do that, then they have a chance. Because if you have a class being terrible for like 6 to 8 months, nah. Like that's just not happening in today's world.
We've seen it. We've seen it before. We know what happens.
Yeah.
Classes get abandoned or scorned, and people have terrible experiences with being excluded and looked down upon for playing that class.
You can look at Abyssos. A lot of people who came from World of Warcraft said, I'm going to play 14 because I can play the class I want to play. I'm not forced to swap. And a lot of people find that as a great draw of this game. But then Abyssos drops. They can't do that anymore. The balancing was off. You are now forced to swap to the class you don't want to play just because you need to do that to meet the check or the fight. While some classes should be better at fights than others, in my opinion, it's like that sort of thing where people start excluding others, especially even eventually from Party Finder and stuff like that. That is a huge problem. And we don't want to see that with the tanks and the healer.
It's also been a consistent problem across all the expansions. I don't think there's ever been an expansion, except for Endwalker, for the most part. And even then you said Abyssos was the exception. But in all the other expansions, we've had problems with underpowered, undertuned jobs and getting excluded from parties or forced to swap for specific fights in the raiding scene. Outside of raiding, it doesn't happen.
And now people don't want you to play Black Mage just because they're like, it's too hard. You're griefing by not playing Summoner. So you have a slightly different problem.
Even when you're the good Black Mage. They're just like, why?
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, you can't res. I was like, have you seen a Summoner or Red Mage play in PF? Like melee combo, use it on Slipstream. Like, it's not any fucking better. Come on, just let me play Black Mage. Kio's laughing as a healer because he knows, because he's like, if they don't have it, I'm up next.
Nah, man. Getting people to raise in PF is a struggle. You just save your Swift because no one else is going to do it.
Correct. Precisely. Now, there's been a lot of people in different camps on Astro about what will happen to it, what should happen to it, and what they just kind of want to happen to it. Now, I'll give you an example. Sly wants it to go back to Heavensward cards, for example.
Same.
He's a big. You know what's funny?
Finally, thank you.
The thing is, what's funny is Heavensward cards were like, it's kind of dumb and kind of silly at the same time, but they were still way less bloated than that whole sleeve draw situation you were just describing.
They're fun. If you are not playing for the bounce fishing, for the like AoE damage buff, if you don't fish for that, then they are fun. Because then you just get something and you get to play it out and you kind of get to work with it, which is terrible. That's terrible design because your randomness. The randomness makes it terrible, and I think they're going to move away from that completely into the future. I think the cards are actually going to become off GCDs that you press, and they're consistent from now on. But they were fun. So. They were very fun.
Like I said, I think Astro is the most interesting to talk about. I could talk for ages about it. But the good thing about Astro changing so dramatically every expansion is we got a lot of different like examples to look at of how it was done in different sections and whether it was successful or not and the ups and downs. Like Heavensward was really cool card design, but really toxic in terms of like how different it was if you drew an AoE balance versus not drawing it and how hugely different that impacted the damage of the pull. Yeah. And then like Shadowbringer is the bloat and not getting much payoff for it was a big problem. And then Stormblood, I think, was largely pretty good example of you still had the balance, but you had all these extra tools too that was interesting. So I think Stormblood early was pretty cool. I liked early Stormblood Astro. But I don't think they're going back to any of those designs. I think the rework's going to be completely different. So
Kio, I got a question for you then. Would you play Astro if they removed the mitigation on Bubble? Everything else is exactly the same, but the mitigation you gain for like the bubble that you put up? The dome?
What would you think it's like super impactful and that's why it would just determine whether you play it or not?
Yeah, would
I
you
don't think I don't think collective mit's very like crucial to Astro gameplay. I don't think it would matter. I think the regen's more of what people use it for these days.
Okay. Because I've asked a couple people, and the fact that that bubble, collective unconscious, is on a 60-second timer, and it is 10%, is actually quite significant in an ultimate, and that is why some players tell me they take Astro into like something like top. That is why they wanted to take it, because they pretty much are going to have it whenever they need it, and you won't die then if you make it to the raid wide AoE usually. But if you remove that, I think about it. I'm like, okay, then why would you play Astro if they were to remove that mitigation?
I mean, you're basically, if you think that that's a reason not to play Astro, then you would never play White Mage, right? Because White Mage doesn't have that. It doesn't have a 60-second mit.
It has the
Temperance is 2 minutes.
Yeah, it is. It's 2 minutes.
So
that's why
White Mage is the only job I feel bad playing. Not I like playing it, but then I see all the other mitts that all the other jobs have, and I'm like, ugh, as soon as my wings are gone, I'm just like,
it makes up for it by having a very big stick that hits really hard.
Huge stick.
The miseries, especially in fights like ultimates with downtime, the free miseries are huge. Big damage.
Yeah, but no one's ever talking about the misery when they're trying to plan out surviving wave cannon.
That's true.
I was thinking about my misery usage.
Yeah, I mean that's been the big discussion, is where the Astro's system will go. So there's a bit of a dichotomy between the direction Astro can go. I think most people are expecting the RNG to largely subside in exchange for some other form of identity. Do you now I like to ask a very specific, not what identity do you think? Do you think they're going to go back to leaning into the time mage stuff? Because they kind of did an Endwalker, and it was originally kind of time magey back in the old days. And that's when I think of fun Astro, I think of making my regens last 39 seconds. That's what
I also think that was really fun gameplay, and I miss it.
I agree.
But I don't think they're going to bring it back.
Why would they lean into time mage when they can in a future expansion actually give us?
Because they're never gonna fucking give us time mage. Just accept it.
I think they will.
Sounds that they're never gonna fucking do it.
Okay.
They could do it, but the problem with it is that it would only have to affect your buffs, and they're gonna have to properly balance that into their numbers game. That's the only way they're ever gonna bring it back. Because the whole like extending the time of something, being able to extend your regens is amazing. That's awesome. I want to see more of that. But in today's 14 design from Square Enix, they would say that a player is going to absolutely use it on divination or a card and nothing else, because yeah, they're going to factor in the damage. They don't want Astro to break DPS checks.
Give me that 5 extra seconds on potion.
Yeah, stuff like that is awesome. I think that's great, but you should have the option between using it offensively and defensively. But in current 14, I feel like there isn't an option for a lot of fights. At least within a typical final fight. Within a typical final fight, something like Shiva or something like that, you're not even thinking of using that on your defensive options. That is pure damage week 1. You just go, and you deal with the consequences otherwise.
So if not that, Kio, what direction do you think they'll lean in if the cards are going to largely subside the RNG factor? Or do you just think that the cards will subside RNG-wise and it'll otherwise be not that significantly different?
Yeah, I think that they'll probably do different things with the frequency and power of cards. I don't think that I think they'll make it more consistent, which kind of sucks. I liked the randomness of the old cards. These days they're kind of just the samey. But I don't know. I still have high hopes for it, because I think it's the one area that healers are really sorely lacking right now, which is downtime mechanics to keep us interested and not bored. And Astro was really good at that, so I hope they bring it back. when you said the topic of this show would be hopes for Dawntrail, I was gonna say probably my biggest hope is that they do something to address healer downtime when there's no damage coming in, so that we're not bored out of our minds. Because that's probably the worst part about playing healer right now. When there's no damage and you're just sitting there spamming one button, and you just fall asleep.
Yeah.
It's not even. Did you ever see the post I think Sphere made on from what Shin was pressing in the middle of our top prog? Press like Malefic 78k times and something throughout the whole prog. It's an insane amount. And anybody who plays healer has almost always complained about their fingers hurting at the end of prog.
It's a real
all
problem.
You do is press one button over and over again once you know a phase. And that's terrible gameplay.
Yeah, you'll get
like,
RSI from that.
Yeah, it's unhealthy to begin with, and that's in some ways even worse. But when your prog is done, then healer sucks to play. Nobody wants to play healer out of prog. They will play it in prog, but they won't play it out of prog.
I know a lot of healers that multi-class for that reason. They play everything because once prog is over, they wanna jump around because nobody wants to healer and farm.
Yeah, it can be very boring. I'm hoping they find a way around that, but it's difficult for them to do that because unless they do something to their DPS rotation, they need to add in more damage. And that means more decision making to be doing with your GCDs and off GCDs. The problem that comes with that is also then an issue of adding more mechanics that include the healer, or more damage on the tanks or individuals in the party. And that means your healers are now even more so a single point of failure. And I know that some people complained about this with P8S. There's like an interview with Yoshi P at some point where it's like, there's this difficult aspect where you can't make something too hard because then the newer players can't do it. But if you make it too easy, like the healing, then nobody wants to play it because it's boring. So they have to find a middle ground. But then he said, go play Ultimate. And Ultimate's the same thing, if not worse. Because you also have to figure out exactly what you're doing over so many pools.
What if they made it so that dealing damage and downtime built up your healing resources to use during the high damage sections? A good example of this, they did this in PvP briefly with Scholar being able to broil to get Aetherflow stacks. They could broil targets and they would get Aetherflow stacks that they could then use to lustrate. There was a period of time when that was a thing in the. I don't actually do much PvP these days. I don't know if that's still around, but I thought that was really good design and it felt really good to use. It just really made you want to broil people because you would get these extra resources. And it's like, man, why can't we have some of that in the regular kits? Just something that gives us unlocks from spamming.
That sounds like it would probably work out pretty well, except the big thing that needs to happen is the fight design needs to complement the kit that you have. You can't have if we're going with just if we take these ideas and throw them into Endwalker, they'll work and you'll have more buttons to press. And that sounds kind of fun. But the problem is that there's not enough damage to justify it. At the same time, it's like, how do I put this? There's not enough damage to justify it. And the players who are really good already have also now just found a way to continue to press damage over and over because you've now given them an off GCD that further incentivizes them not doing anything with their healing GCDs.
Yeah.
Because it's partially going to be a decision-making ability, and SE doesn't like this.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking like all that would happen if you did that in Endwalker is you'd still press broil the exact same number of times, but you just have more of something else. You know? So like at the end, would it really change much looking at Endwalker's design? Unfortunately not.
What if every time you broiled 6 times you could do a melee combo and hexa strike the target?
All right, I'm in. I like that idea. I wanted a melee healer for years. I kept saying dancer, melee healer.
I just realized we have XI players and we all understood Hexa Strike.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Sindalf lit up as soon as you said I heard the word hex and I was like, Sindalf's that's it. Sindalf sent. That's it. All right, so Astro, basically just still in the. Would you put yourself in Doomium or would you put yourself in Hopium?
For me, I'm Hopium more than Doomium.
Okay.
I have high
Doomium.
hopes. I feel like design has been going in a better direction overall, and then Walker they're making things feel better in healer kits. There's just not quite there yet, but they're getting it.
Okay.
So I have high hopes that they're going to do it right.
Well, with that, let's jump over to the tank side of the discussion because Dark Knight's been a job that people have almost, they don't know if they want it to be reworked at this point or they want it to just stay the same. Because Dark Knight's another job like Astro that feels like it's been kind of reworked every expansion in some capacity, even though it's like kind of the same identity. So where are you at with Endwalker Dark Knight going into Dawntrail Sindalf?
So to me, Shadowbringer's Dark Knight and Endwalker are almost the same, except Endwalker, I think, has made a bunch of poor decisions because and people want to hang me for this one, but I am not a fan of stacks. I want Blood Weapon to be a timer. I want Delirium to be a timer. If you do not have enough skill speed to hit all your GCDs, that is an uptime / skill issue that you have. You took the slow set and missed the GCD. That is your fault. Play correctly and use the right gear set.
Wow.
Yeah, I am.
Play correctly.
I used to play on the East Coast, going to other data centers on my 130 plus ping, and I could do this just fine because I ran a fast skill speed set. Other people didn't. So by removing, even though I'm theoretically doing less damage, I do more consistently because there's decision making to be made, especially when you have uptime that you have to do. This means you want to make sure you're getting all 5 GCDs in. And that is a pretty big skill thing that you had to do on Dark Knight. They've removed that completely. And I really, really dislike that. Because now we are now stuck as a Dark Knight player in almost all the tanks. Gunbreaker an exception to a degree. You run 2.5. There's not a single reason within your kit to go any faster than that. And that makes gearing boring. That makes your job a little more boring. The players' decisions are not as fun. Look back at Shiva speedruns. For a time, everybody in the top speedruns, top 5, you can look into them. They all had different gear sets for their Dark Knights. Nobody ran the same one except for maybe 2 players. Everybody ran something slightly different. And that's awesome that was a choice you can make. You go to Prague, people would use different melds. That is also awesome that you can make that choice. You can't right now. So, yeah, that's one of them. I don't like that change a lot.
That was a hot one to come in on too.
I mean, really, that's a hill that you will just get sacrificed on.
I will
Jesus
die on that
fucking
hill.
Christ.
I will absolutely die on that hill.
Well,
You did.
Woo.
where you go from there?
I mean, that's the big one. That's the big one.
There's more?
Not as much, to be honest.
No,
Okay.
That one's
not as
that
hot.
one's the big,
Not as
that
hot.
one's the hot take. That one's the hot take
Okay.
that everyone disagrees with, but I think they should bring it back anyway. Players deserve to suffer and then overcome that suffering.
Damn, you sound like me in a
I,
SMT player.
I was gonna say I think largely we're in a really golden era in terms of tanks, where I think the kits are pretty good overall. We have a combination of balance, uniqueness. The different tanks are sorted to are better at different things in a way that's interesting. So I'm surprised we got to this point eventually because I was always complaining about the differences between tanks over past expansions. But right now, I think the only thing I'm upset about is that Warrior is just so dominant in dungeons. But I mean, because it's kind of boring. You just don't want to get another tank in dungeons because Warrior is so good at it, or you want another tank so that you have something to do as healer, because otherwise the Warrior just solo heals the whole dungeon.
Yeah,
But,
that was going to be another big one when we got to it, but I'll just go ahead and ask, how do you feel about Warriors sustain? Did they just really just overwork the shit out of it?
I don't know what they were thinking.
They've had to make those adjustments. Like they had to make. The thing is that sustain doesn't entirely matter because if you look at the start of the expansion, nobody played it because it didn't do damage.
Right.
Like they had to buff it like 3-4 times to get to where it was. But once they actually got there, there was a choice that I was like before Prague that I constantly had to like think about. Do I take the warrior or do I take the Dark Knight? And this is like I'm glad that I have that choice that I need to make, and it's actually very fight dependent which one you take.
It
like
is, yeah.
If you're doing something like P11S, you want the warrior for that. Absolutely, Dark Knight brings pretty much nothing to the table in that fight. If you were doing P12S, take the Dark Knight. Partly because of the downtime during limit cut in the door boss, and that's the big place where you want him. But warrior sustain is very strong, and since the beginning of the expansion, it has been better than Dark Knight's for a single press of the button. You don't lose anything by pressing it. You gained, I think it was about 30-something% of your HP back at one point. And that's excellent, plus all the other mitigation you gain. Whereas Dark Knight would only have 25% as shield. But that shield has a trade-off of if you don't break it, you lose your damage, and it's fast, and it's a 15-second cooldown. The fight needs to have enough damage to make that useful.
The decisions are interesting. The only problem is that the whole system breaks as soon as you get into multi-target. As soon as you get into multi-target, Warrior is comically invulnerable every bloodwetting cooldown. They just cannot die. And it's just funny. Like we went back to A8S recently, and it was just funny when our Warrior realized when they were tanking both robots at the wall in the second phase of A8, where you have to tank two very large, hard-hitting bosses, that he could just AoE combo, even though you're losing damage, and just sustain to full every bloodwetting cooldown. It was just funny. How much of a
And then when the
difference that made.
orb actually picks that side of the room too.
The three-target cleave. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's wild. And you know what's funny? This used to be Dark Knight's thing with Abyssal Drain back in Heaven's Ward, where they could Dark Arts Abyssal Drain a group of mobs and be like, yeah, there we go. Now and then they're like, by the way, 1 minute cooldown. They're like, but what? Why that? Then they gave Paladin it on the whole caster combo for Requiescat, and they're like, it's like, look at what you're doing. Why am I left out?
But hey, that burst though.
Yeah, and it's tied to Carven Spit to boot. It's not even like a separate thing. So they really tried to hurt Dark Knight. But it's interesting because I feel like when you often hear tank discussion, you do still hear this homogenization discussion a lot, even amongst the tanks. So it's interesting to hear a tank or two tanks even talk more about the more interesting decision. Do you think that comes from being more of an ultimate raider and less of a just because dungeon goers probably feel a bit more homogenized. People just doing like generally easier content probably feel it a bit more.
I think it all just comes down to less about ultimate, like you're doing that and doing blind prog. If you want to take the one that you feel is going to be with the way the current content is, you'd want to run whichever one is going to be easier to step into what you need to do. And usually that is Dark Knight. Sometimes it is Warrior.
Yeah, Warrior has this reputation that if it gets bad circumstances, it's really bad. Like if there's specifically timed downtimes, or if there's a knockback that if you just happen to have your immune up because you were doing a 60-second burst, then it ruins the knockback and suddenly it causes a problem. Like there's these situations where Warrior gets screwed, and Dark Knight was always the safer pick. But not just for those reasons. That's just what I see. Sindalf usually says other reasons, like just the damage being more consistent, right? For Dark Knight, just more guaranteed.
Yeah, having that 60-second Dark Mind for the 20% magic, since almost all the damage in this game is magic, that matters half the time. Very easy to play, and the big thing is that I think about a lot is how much can you lose on a class by messing it up. Warrior, you can overcap very easily on both your timer for Inner Chaos. You can also overcap Eye pretty easily as well. Or you can just drop it completely at some point. Versus Dark Knight, unless you overcap your mana, which is kind of built into your rotation, that will not happen for the most part. The only thing you typically lose is party synergy. And you can just move all that stuff around. You didn't lose the GCD. You just lost the party synergy. That's it. So it makes it very straightforward to play when you start realizing this about the class. Like, a lot of people say Dark Knight's hard, and there's reasons they think that. But at some point, you realize, wait a minute, I can just be an absolute monkey and just press every button on my keyboard randomly, and it almost does not matter. Your damage is going to be nearly the same sometimes, besides some party synergy stuff. And that's part of what makes that class very good, in my opinion. I like that I don't lose much, and I can actually then focus more on my tanking job when it comes up.
One of the only times I've heard Dark Knight referred to as a Fizz range, what I would like to call the machinist of tanks. Machinist is very much, if you don't want to optimize, as long as you never clip a button, you just press them as soon as they become available, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah, I'd say it can be pretty similar to that.
It's the first time I've heard it for Dark Knight, is all I'm saying.
I will say, though, on that note, the big change that I think they made tanks in general that makes them a little more boring this expansion is Ninja Trick Attack. They turned it to Mug. They made it 2 minutes. It was the difference between a tank that could burst properly into buffs every 60 seconds versus the ones who can't was big. They got rid of that completely. And every class, I believe, in the game is worse for it. But especially tanks are worse for it. Because it's just, you don't do anything during your 60 other than just press your buttons randomly. But it's just like, no, that's boring. I want that big dopium numbers coming into my brain every 60 seconds. I want to feel good because I aligned everything. The class is kind of designed around that aligning. Why do we not have that?
This is very personal, by the way. Sindalf got very upset about losing his Trick Attack.
I'm going to also say, Happy, if you are going to the media tour, I know you can't say if you are or aren't, but if you are, tell Yoshi P to bring that back. What the hell? I know what he was thinking. I get it. There's balanced reasons as to why they made the changes they made, and it makes sense. I get it. But bring back it at least on the 60s.
I'm a big advocate for getting 2 or 3 jobs that have the same exact type of debuff on 60s. I almost think of it like, what's a good example? What is it? Time Warp and what's the Shaman one? It's been so long. Just one, chat, help me out. I haven't played WoW. Bloodlust. Yeah, like I think of like jobs that all have a Bloodlust style attack, but like in our case, it's some sort of 60-second debuff. Honestly, I think we even mentioned this on the melee shows. Make it a roll action at this point. That's like dependent on like one melee can bring it, and then it like they can only use it once a minute or something like that.
I could dig it.
Something. I really do think we need the 1 minute
like
back.
A damage or a damage roll action.
Honestly, just something that makes us have to think more than once every 2 minutes.
Yeah.
That's it. And even if they just want to give it to 2 or 3 different jobs in the game and you bring one of them at some point, honestly, with the way people are dooming about Picto not having a raise, you might have to give it to them.
Well,
oh no.
Picto probably will have something.
Yeah, they said it would have something, yeah.
It kind of has to.
Well,
because if it doesn't...
they said it was going to be a support job, right? It's a buffer. It's a buffer, debuff, or whatever.
Yeah,
it's some kind of utility.
The thing is, like, that utility has to be strong because I believe they said it's not going to compete with Black Mage in terms of damage. I think they said that in the translation. But if it doesn't have raise, it has to do more than Summer and Red Mage, unless they get that removed as well. Like, there's no reason to take it then, unless it has something insane that we're not from a mitigation standpoint. And then but the thing with that is, okay, why would you take it if it doesn't do as much as Black Mage, at least in the RDPS category? So that buff that it brings has to do more if everybody else plays better. That is the only reason you would ever take a Picto then versus Black Mage.
Just have Picto paint a ninja, it uses trick, and then that's it.
Yeah, I'd be cool with that. As
Back
long as I get it back.
attacks.
No, I told this too. It's like if this class has trick, you're taking that every time. you're just playing that class. Like you're perma locked in.
Let's not get too much. We did casters last week. We don't need to get too much into it. But I know it's relevant to you talking about tanks, but we all feel the pain of not having the 1 minute. Even Sly's like, listen, as the Dragoon, I liked it too. I just wasn't going to be the one doing it. I'll let the other melee do it. bring it back. All right, yeah.
Please.
So, all right, so honestly, kind of just jumped into the all tank category. Like you took it from Dark Knight immediately to every other tank, pretty much.
A lot of the tanks right now they're very similar, and at the same time, their kits kind of don't matter. Aside from the few that exist for mitigation purposes, like your reactive button and some of the raid-wide mitigation, you don't really care that much about which one you pick as long as they're doing similar damage. I will say I think old content actually better complements our current kit. Like when we mentioned the untelegraphed busters or stuff being more often, that's something, or like 15-second TBN, very nice, or like the 25 seconds for other classes. It fits that perfectly, and yet they got rid of it. I don't understand that. I mean, okay, I get why they got rid of it.
It's really ironic. We've noticed, we've been going back and doing a ton of old stuff too. And it's like, yeah, this just makes so much more sense. Like we had like 2 mitt buttons total back then, and there was like a buster every like 15 seconds or some shit. And it's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Now we have fucking cooldown every 25 seconds. We got a 90, we got a 120, we got this. The healers have it, and you're just like, what the fuck? This makes so much more sense. They got it backwards.
They might add something to that in Dawntrail. But
you think instant busters? Yeah, I sincerely
not
doubt.
not instant busters, because I think they'll consider that to be unfair by today's design. And some players do think it's unfair because, like, how was I supposed to even see that coming? Like, I just had to know. But instead, I think they might add more busters that do this like medium damage at some point. That as long as you either have one thing or you're topped, it won't kill you, but it will leave you near death. And that adds this healer and tank gameplay where they actually have to be a little bit paying attention, and you are rewarded more than for planning. I think that's where they might want to go, but I am unsure if they're willing to go down that route.
Do you not think they might take the other route where, because every single one of those short cooldowns is also technically a party cooldown, where they kind of go the other direction? Because that seems to be kind of more the intention with them now. Yeah, use it on yourself and it makes sense, but it's meant to be the party tool in a sense, like a skill expression party tool on who you're using it on.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they'll like lean more into that instead, as it being more of the party tool to save people and help people?
I mean, you already use it that way.
Yeah.
But they could do that. They would have to rework the mechanics, though. The big Endwalker design with mechanics has been all 8 people do something. So me using TBN or Bloodwetting, well, Flash, or any of the other stuff on the party doesn't mean anything. It's useless. Why would I do that? Because all 8 players are taking damage. The healers have to raid-wide heal anyway. Me maybe making the Bard topped is pointless. You've actually done nothing to help the group out in that case. Unless they were going to die. Then you've actually done. But most of the time, that's not happening. So I think they'd have to change the mechanics up so that, once again, they're more open-ended. So that we have to make decisions as to who does what, like, kind of task that we are given. And they have to be sort of spread out in a way, such that certain players are taking damage at a certain time, maybe in succession of each other. And then it becomes more useful to start giving the other players something like a TBN. So I remember what I did in T for a while. I had a choice that I had to do this during limit cut at the start of the fight. That's a point where there's people moving and there's succession bits of damage. And you typically have two choices to give, at the time anyway, to give your like TBN to and party-wide MIT for the BJCC dropdown. You either give it to the Bard. If I remember right, they didn't really have much at that point, or at least I don't think our Bard had anything because they needed in the previous phase. And they're like one of the most squishy characters at the time. Or you give it to whoever was number 8.
Or 7.
Yeah, 7 or 8, those both work because they have the lowest window of time between like the actual damage, and that's a place where I think is like a decent example of there was a certain amount of damage with a window between things where you can save somebody that way, and that's where it really those mitigations really start becoming a party mit.
So what I'm hearing is even more limit cuts in Dawntrail.
No more mechanic than more damage back to back. Because that's really the thing that I think this game lacks sometimes is you need to make the healer and tank kits work well. You can't just have a piece of damage and then stop. Can't do that. That doesn't do anything. You need something, then something else, and then maybe a third thing, and so on and so forth.
I just want to say as a counterpoint to that is in DSR was the first time I realized that with the addition of healer single targeted mitts, we essentially can give personals to the whole raid team now, even when you have multiple DPS jobs that don't have a personal defensive, like shield or anything like that. Like a white mage alone can give out 3 personals. They can give out Aquaveil and 2 Benisons, and plus the 2 tank mitts, plus a couple DPS having personal shields. If we had just a little bit more, like a couple extra tools, it would be consistent with any comp to be able to use those as a raid mitt. But we, some comps can't do it right now, so it's not really a thing. But we're close to it if they changed them that way.
Well, you just remove the tanks from that equation. If you remove the tanks from the equation, then I think you can make it work. The tanks are probably not going to need it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You use 6 targets, and like the white mage covers 3, the tanks can each cover 1. You essentially just need 1 DPS with a shield, and you can cover everyone.
And if you have if you have a Dark Knight, you also have the double oblation, so they can hit 3 people.
That's my favorite thing about Dark Knight is oblation.
It's very good in that DSR transition in the final phase into P7. It's very nice there.
It kind of got memed on because of the cooldown when the expansion first began, and then everyone's like, well, but then when I do have both of them, it's great.
That's interesting because it is definitely pretty weak, and it is very rarely the make or break difference. It is something that can be helpful. The thing is, if you make it stronger, it's a little too powerful, given the fact that you have 2 stacks of it and you can use it freely.
But that is something very unique to Dark Knight, is the oblation thing. It is an overlooked aspect because of what you just said.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. All right. One thing... Oh, sorry. Go.
I actually think it could be potentially used more on the party going into Dawntrail, because I keep thinking about how currently damage in certain fights is very high, like top. Like the amount of damage the boss does in the final phase is actually kind of insane. The fact that you need not only your mitt, but you also need the whole parties to even survive. They're in like Wave Cannon, Cosmo Dive, the Buster in P5. You need quite a lot to actually live through all that. So during the trailer for Dawntrail, some of the in the benchmark, we see at the end a warrior using an upgraded form of vengeance, or at least what people think is an upgraded form of vengeance. What are they doing with that? Because they could go the boring route and just say, press this button and suddenly you gain more potency on your reflect. That's boring. Please don't do that. They probably will do something like that, but add something else to it. There's some rumors that they are also doing that to the other tanks to some degree, but then you ask, what would they do with it? Are they just going to turn it into a 35% or a 40% at that point? But what actually would require you to do that is impactful enough that the damage is high enough that you actually need something that powerful? And if they are doing that, that means something like Oblation is actually pointless for tank busters. It's not, maybe not pointless, but it is so less impactful because you already have an option to bump up your percentage by quite a bit. So where does that Oblation go then? Well, I think if they do stuff with the mechanics, then that means you start giving it to the party more often.
We have
But
something.
that's fight design.
We have something similar with healers in the benchmark too, right? Like the Astro and White Mage both have like upgraded AoE heal animations. It's like what is that?
And then Scholar had what everyone thinks is super chain.
Yeah, and then Sage has like Toxicon 4 or something like that. It's an upgraded Toxicon.
Yeah.
And so what are you doing with buffing the AoE heals? Like, why? What does that do?
Cool
I'm
new
wondering
animation.
What could that signify in terms of raid mechanics? Maybe the regen healers are getting a shield on their AoE heals, both of them. I don't know. Who knows?
I'm gonna
Maybe we
ruin
need
that
them.
for you. I bet you it's 20 more potency.
I hope
this.
not.
Players are very bad at predicting what Koreanix is going to do. We've been
Yes.
terrible at it every expansion.
Yes.
But it's fun.
It's
So
fun.
we're going to do it anyway.
Telling you, it's just 20 more potency. I've seen this with the healer DPS spells for 5 expansions now. I'm telling you, it's 20 more.
Realistically, you're probably right, because and this is less Doomium and more acceptance. And I think Yoshi P said this himself to some degree, sort implicitly. They are not willing right now to take up the challenge of changing both the fight mechanics and the designs and the classes at the same time. That is a very difficult ask for them to do. Because if they're making things more open-ended, they also have to make sure that they can't come up with something and then suddenly the player base finds the most brain-dead, boring way to handle it because they overlooked it. Because that can happen. And if they do that, if the player base does that, SE will just keep it in. They're not going to patch it.
I mean, I'm thinking of things in line with like based on the changes they've made every expansion up till now. Up till now, there's been something significant changed about all healers every expansion. So there's going to be something significant in Dawntrail too, and probably tanks as well. Just we don't know what. We can't predict. We're like you said, we're terrible at predicting what. But I don't think they're going to do nothing. I don't
Yeah,
think
it'd be
we're just
really
getting-
unfortunate.
I don't think we're getting aspected Helios 3 or something like that. Nah.
What I think
3? You're just gonna skip 2?
Yeah, skip 2, go straight to 3.
Is this because of the white mage in you? Just skipping?
Yes, exactly.
I don't know how they're going to do this for healers. But for tanks and probably DPS classes, they might do this for as well. I think they're going to do one of 2 things in a lot of places. So one of them is buttons transforming into other buttons. So we see that with Confidier. We see that with Salted Earth. Which, funny enough, the only reason Salted Earth changed to the way it is now is Yoshi P played the class. Remember, Kio, when I said that they don't play their own games sometimes? He actually played the class and then realized, this is bad, I'm changing it. Because you have to use a macro in order to weave the ability. But you have to, and then Gnashing Fang as well. Buttons will transform into other buttons. At the same time, I think they're going to, and there might be some rumors to correlate this at some point, combine some buttons together. Because we are at a point where you can't add more to the game. You can, but you can't really add more buttons because of the controller limits, the players being overwhelmed by what they see, because we already have a lot. Just those 2 issues alone would make classes, if they tried to go beyond, it would make them way more complex, and it would probably be very difficult for a lot of players to continue to play the game when they've added that complexity. But if
They've also made it clear it's a design decision. They are deliberately reducing button count. So they're not going to suddenly change that, I don't think.
But if they end up actually but if they end up doing removing some buttons, they will end up removing some of the class identity and things that make the class tick. So unless they just change or remove some of our off GCD damage buttons to be a little less redundant in the way that they operate, such as class having this many off GCD buttons that you press that are all just pure damage and they don't do much else, like they'd have to add more augments to them to make them worth pressing. But also not have them such as the player is only pressing them for just damage. You can then combine buttons together or something like that, or have them transform in some way such that you get the both effects. And that way you don't lose everything. You're not losing what the buttons that you originally had, and they can start adding in new things. And that
we kind of
potentially
touched
work.
that. We kind of touched on that with the melee and with Dragoon and how many fucking off GCDs we have. We press in a fucking 20-second span. Yeah, we could do without a little bit.
Yeah, pressing a button just for damage is kind of, in my opinion, right now, at least with the design of stuff, is boring. If you're pressing it just for damage, it can be cool and stuff from time to time if there's a reason to. But at least from a tank and a healer's perspective, you're not playing a DPS. You're trying to play a support class. If there's a reason to press it beyond damage, that it gives you some kind of benefit or trade-off, that's great. I love that. I want more of that. Give me a reason to press Carve and Spit outside of my burst window.
Well, tanks are blue DPS.
He wants to get away from it, Sly. That's what he's asking. I saw Sly's face change and he said, "We're not DPS," and Sly's face instantly, it was just like,
we're all DPS in the end.
oh yeah.
Everyone's a DPS. I was actually going to ask, you've been playing a lot of, some Sage, right, Sindalf?
I have too.
Not really. I only play it because I don't like playing Scholar. It feels bad.
I wanted to mention, just because I feel like every time we talk about healers, I have to mention Energy Drain. Energy Drain has been a push and pull from Square Enix. Like in Stormblood, they tried to remove it
for
and they
years.
And then Shadowbringers, they did remove it and then they brought it back, and it survived Endwalker. But we did finally get the shield healer that doesn't have Energy Drain to see how it feels. And
the answer is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I still think it feels bad when you have nothing to heal and you're forced to like Druacoli just for MP so that you don't overcap. But yeah, I was gonna say, do you think that works? Do you think that, are you more optimistic now about removal of Energy Drain, or do you think it survives another expansion? Because I'm on the fence about this.
I think it's gone, in all honesty, unless they're going to change the way it works. Because like the way I know that you're thinking about like Energy Drain as like the thing to spend. I think about how Sage actually has a technical 2-minute buff window to some capacity. Like it doesn't initiate anything, but making sure that you actually stay on top of your the usages of your phlegma is, like, for me, enough. Having more GCDs that are stronger is kind of like a trade-off I'll take, because I know the Dracole thing is kind of a little like, it's one of those things that, in easy content I'm worried about it, and hard content though it's like I'm not even thinking about it. It's like I'm grateful to have a shield as often, an AoE heal that's off GCD, a single target in case somebody screws up, a mitt button for myself, or like all the other options I have are so satisfying when I'm playing Sage that I'm never thinking, oh, I don't have an Energy Drain equivalent.
Maybe it's not really an Energy Drain equivalent, but isn't Numa that? Or Giant Laser Beam?
Numa's, no, I wouldn't consider that.
I meant just a spender for your for your
Yeah.
Aether Flow, basically. That isn't just wasting HP.
Well, I don't think Sage is going to get that, and I don't know if they're going to keep. I think they'll want to keep it on Scholar because people like it. The thing is that Sage does have an equivalent in a way, not a pure 1-to-1, but it has a similar thing. It's just that in Numa, the Laser Beam, because that does damage and it also heals. And the way I look at that is a trade-off at some point you have to make. It's not much of one because it's really a party synergy one, but I hope that they keep that on Scholar so that Scholar has this option. Because at least right now, Scholar's, unless they make Sage cracked, Scholar's going to stay on top.
Well, they're in a much better place now than they were before. I think they're pretty close as far as performing. Scholar's still got that little extra edge with the crit deploy, but Sage is right up there with throughput mitigation. So
Well, it's you have to factor in the fact that like what does SE expect you to do with energy drain? Damage or healing? If they expect you to actually heal with it, then you're by pressing it for damage, you would do more than the SE expected. And Sage, a Scholar as well, also just has to, on paper, do more overall because of chain. There's no point in bringing chain otherwise. Well, actually, no, that's not completely true.
I mean, that's why they nerfed the potency into the ground, and energy drain is what is it? 2 energy drains is the potency of a broil. It's something like that. It's pretty weak.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's the key difference between Numa and Energy Drain is that Energy Drain is trade-off of
It's
healing
pretty
for
weak.
damage. Numa is like you're always
Insane.
using Numa for damage pretty much, but like you're whether or not you're using it to 2-target versus the healing timing. Like
It's generally not a gain of potency. You're not
Yeah.
gaining or losing potency based on Numa usage.
yeah,
that's
unless you're
why-
using it during like Numa on double dragons at some point, you know, there's a gain there. That's just to make sure to aim it. But that's
Use it.
kind of it.
Use it on Phoenix during the ads phase. Get
Yeah.
all 4.
Yeah.
Do it. Get time it just right to heal the party and do insane damage. You'll never miss a DPS check ever again.
Oh yeah, that's you were saying like Scholar on top, but man, you want to talk about the area Scholar falls weak on? It's everything AOE. Don't
Yeah.
give us a 2-target fight. Scholar's going to be the worst healer by a mile.
Nothing more satisfying. Like you talked about the misery timings for you know like that's like the downtime thing, but man, nothing beats when you go into meteor phase as an Astro and you're just like stand in the middle of the room and you're like, now this is what I've been waiting for.
Macro, star, lord. All dead.
Top DPS right there. What a fucking great moment. Astro had some pretty good moments between Phoenix at the start of the expansion and DSR. They had a pretty good first 2 patches of I'm so glad to be an Astro right now moments. Times like that where you actually feel like there's like job expression and then you go back to the rest of it and you're like, oh, okay.
But it's a similar thing with like in top Sage doing double phlegmas in the 2-target sections
Yeah.
of phase 2. So you can get 2 different double phlegma cleaves that is just massive, man. You use so much potency out of that.
It's the only way to get exciting about that, about the healing decisions. These little tiny moments where you're like, oh, this one button I press for everything else. No, this is the moment where that button stands out. That's good. They at least healers still have that for the most part. Now, before we get on to the healers, because we're getting to about 90 minutes in the show, we were talking about tanks for a little bit, but we never really touched on Gunbreaker or Paladin. Can you give us a quick once-over on hopes and dreams for those, Sindalf? Since I know people are definitely going to want to hear, especially Gunbreaker.
I don't play both of them very often.
That's
But
fine.
Gunbreaker, if the thing with Gunbreaker, I think I don't play enough of it, but the big thing that I think most players want is just a change to the way cartridges work. And that's weird to me because I'm like, that's just your spender. Like, what?
It's your
Why
spender
would you-
until double down happens, seems to be the consensus.
And the thing I really want out of Gunbreaker to change is a problem with all the tanks. I don't want double down to exist in its current form with the amount of damage it does. And that's just an override system problem of the game that they've done, where they're putting so much potency on certain buttons. Like the big press this button, and if it crit direct hits, you will know. You will know when that does. Because that is going to make or break like something like a parse and stuff like that. And I know they have to do it, I think, partly because of I think it helps the overall general community. I mean, you know this Happy from Heaven's Ward and ARR. If you looked at any log or anything else, the one thing players really suck at, they don't press their buttons. But when most of your damage comes from the big button, okay, maybe pressing those buttons isn't as important as long as you press the big one. So that's more of just like a system thing that I'd like to see. Otherwise, I just think the class is rigid, which is why I typically don't play it. I like tanks to be flexible. It feels strange unless that tank is going to be on top, that it is really rigid in the way that its rotation works. And it's you often get off GC. There's like, imagine you're tanking, you're about to take a tank buster, and you're in your continuation combo. That just feels awful. And the only thing that really happens is you're pressing continuation for damage. So there's no benefit you're going to gain.
That's a skill issue. Pre-pop your cooldowns.
I'll say this.
How many times are we going to hear this podcast?
I can't remember when my cooldowns are. I don't remember the exact timing for buffs. And if I can't remember, guess what? Neither is the rest of the community.
One of them lasts 20 seconds. Come on.
I will press that when I get the chance.
Go into the cast bar.
When the cast bar starts.
I just hope that it's more than just a faded circle continuation and another sword on.
What about a double down continuation?
Oh my
God.
God.
It's also funny, Kio. You say press stuff early. Part of Corundum is one of the, and Bloodwedding has this, Flash, Intervention, all that stuff. If you press them, you have a 4-second window of an extra buff. And that buff is significant.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I really want to know what SE thinks about that and how that has worked out. Because it feels like it fits into this game and it doesn't. If you know the damage is coming and you use it on the cast bar, it's great, and in that ways it fits. But we don't have the untelegraphed buster.
I like how easy it is to mess up, because it definitely is a form of skill expression timing, that so that you catch the extra percent on the short buff. I like that. It goes along with the healer single target mitts as just being a timing thing. They're only up for a short time, and you have to get the timing right. And I think it's a good addition.
So that's what SE said when they originally added stuff like that in, when they had like FanFest, I think for Shadowbringers or something. I believe they had a thing on screen that said, the effectiveness of these abilities will depend on player skill. It's like, okay, that's cool. I get that. But I actually think it is less skill to press your button when you see the cast bar, rather than planning for it like you mentioned earlier, and having stuff that is long that can cover multiple abilities. To me, that is skill expression. But when it's short like this, the only time, in my opinion, that it becomes skill expression is if you're timing it for a mechanic or something that isn't really a cast bar. To me, that's skill expression with it, but the way we currently use it, no, not at all. Going into old content, I thought it was great, because it's more catered toward that stuff.
I was just surprised how much I'd be running with like really good players, and we'd have issues with tank busters, and not very often, but sometimes. And I go check the clip to see what happened, and their short mitt fell off. The briefer, the shorter cooldown of the two, fell off, and I was like, oh man. Even people who are really good can mistime that pretty easily. It takes focus.
That can happen if you either try pre-popping too early, or if it's a 5-second cast bar, 4-second timer. If you press it first in your weaving, you will die.
Conversely, if you wait too long and it doesn't snapshot it because you pushed it too late, that's a tremendous amount of extra damage.
Yeah, that is true.
And before we move on to healers, anything on Paladin?
Bring back cover, having no gauge cost. I missed that button.
I think they're gonna.
It's
I think they're gonna remove
but it sucks. But yeah, I get what you mean.
I think they're removing cover.
Go ahead.
No, I think they're gonna remove cover because it has so many unintended effects that it's hard for them to figure out.
That was fun. Bring back fun.
It is fun, and they should keep having fun. But no, I don't know a single person who actually understands how cover works.
They
I
did
don't
something.
know how it works.
They did something with cover in the no healer top clear, right?
Yeah,
there was a cover cheese there.
You cover someone and they don't get the debuff.
Yeah. So they could live through the magic number.
That is a weird unintended effect. That, for all we know, this could affect other things. Imagine you could do it in caloric, and you could just remove one of them off the field.
It's such an iconic ability The Paladin has always had it. It feels so sad, man, that it's gotten to this point. Like they double tapped it by removing the mit and increasing by giving a gauge cost, and like just one of those two things would have been enough that it was still viable.
Yeah.
You know how in the Dawntrail benchmark, how the Vengeance upgrade has the like jump in front, which by the way I don't think is a mechanic. I think they did that for cinematic purpose. I don't think Vengeance is gonna gap close you to the target like it showed there or whatever it was gonna be. What if cover was, you know, that was their thing. They can jump to an ally and do it that way instead, just grant them mit.
I would like that.
That would be great.
I think I was thinking that when I saw the trailer at one point, in the benchmark. How cool would it be if other jobs had stuff like wings, where you could use something like Vengeance or another ability, and then the player behind you either took less damage or had like a slight R behind you, similar to wings, or just some interaction with that to make your positioning interesting in relevance to other players.
You mean like an actual defensive?
Yeah, the actual defensive.
I wonder what that would be like, huh?
That would be nice. Imagine if you were taking like a double buster at some point, and for both tanks, and because of the way this all operates, you could place one of them behind the other, but just like not enough to clip each other, but like the others getting either some increased mitigation due to stuff like that. I think that would be really cool, and that would be skill expression.
That'd probably be the only way we fucking get a fucking defensive cooldown.
No, you know what? When it comes to you guys getting defensive cooldowns, I'm gonna say if Square Enix is listening, bring back Palisade and bring back Apakata Stasis.
Yeah,
bring those two back. Palisade and Apakata Stasis. I want those back.
And give Nature's Min on a 15-second cooldown again, or like 45 seconds. A very short one from Bard. I would like that as well. Back when we were in like wheelchair emoji, I remember in Stormblood when we were trialing people, that was one of the number one things I would look at, because the difference between a player you pressing the button and not pressing it is huge, and having all your DPS players having input on that is so nice to have. So I think that would be a great addition.
They've been bouncing back and forth on whether they want, on how much they want DPS to be included in like Void Mit. And they keep going back and forth every expansion. So I guess we'll see.
So it's time to bring it back, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Well, I think they did in some ways. They said, "Oh, we're gonna make Feint work on both physical and magical." Not as much, but they're gonna do that. And
same thing with that.
Wide mitigation from like the Fizz ranged.
Listen, I'm so bored. Yeah, you can give me Palisade back. Honestly, just I'm like, I would not. If you can finally fucking ask me to do something that isn't just, hey, where is that? Nobody. The thing that pisses me off about the raid mit for ranged is that you're the last person that gets asked, and it's like pulls down the line after you fucking die to the same thing repeatedly. Finally, somebody goes, hey, where are you putting that? They never tried to figure it out before. They just ask what you've been doing the entire time.
Yeah, that does happen.
I mean, what else are you doing?
Going back to the Pally real quick. One thing, how are we feeling right now about Pally's identity? Because it don't feel like a paladin.
See, here's the thing. I really like what they did with Paladin in 6.3. But there's one particular thing that they did that is not done in most of the rest of the game. They have a 3 GCD kind of open-ended section of their burst window where they're just like free souls.
What's wrong with that?
I like that. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
They don't do like every other job. It's like I have to have exactly these things across all of these GCDs every burst window. And Paladin doesn't have, they have a 3 GCD like range where they just like don't have to worry about exactly what they're doing, and it's just like this moment of relax where you can just kind of be a tank if you really need to be in that time.
What if they just shoved Rage of Halones into that section? That make you feel like
then Jack would probably miss them.
Oh no.
See, Jack missed Rage of Halone. Now Jack just misses it.
Jack longs for the Rage of Holonia.
What about
Maybe-
you don't play it, Sindalf, but I'm sure you have a thought on it.
I mean, I don't play. I mean, the big thing I want back with Paladin is, I think, bring back Goring Blade Dot. Everybody wants that, though, so that's, once again, broken
Why
record.
though? That's what I hear. I see
Dots
Goring
are
Blade
fun.
OGCD. No, they're not. Oh, Goring
Yes.
Blade OGCD I see, but I don't see the dot aspect.
mean
Like,
they're not?
nobody's like, oh yeah, Sonic Break Dot, love that.
No, hold on. What do you mean Dot's on fun?
Not anymore. They're not.
The multi-target optimization for that was kind of fun back in the day.
And it's great for that, and it's great for phases where the boss disappears.
Yeah, but not once a minute. Like when it was the GCD combo finisher, sure, it was interesting. Now it's just
Okay, yes. That
now
I-
it's just an OGCD. It's like
that I
it's
understand.
basically-
When it is
it's
a
boring.
combo finisher, that's great. I'll agree with that one.
yeah.
I mean, we were
But-
also sad to lose Scourge by the same token, right?
I know.
It's similar, and we like dots. Dots are fun, and yeah.
Yes.
it's-
And then mini
So
combos.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah, because you just said bring the dot back. I'm like, is a 1 minute GCD? Who cares? Like,
I mean, I want them anyway. So, yeah,
see,
as a
that's what I mean.
As a GCD would be good as part of your combo. But the other thing is, was Sly was saying something about it doesn't feel like a paladin. You do have paladin abilities like clemency. You never
I
press
love
it,
that
though.
shit.
I would love it if they found a way to make it useful. You almost never press that button.
Wait a minute. I feel like paladins use clemency all the time.
No, they don't.
Wait a minute. I just
I see it all the time. I love when I see the paladin who's only thinking about getting to the prog point more than anything, and they are suddenly just like that like last little bit of support that just gets you through it. And then during downtime too, especially because the MP requirement for their burst isn't like ultra strict anymore.
Yeah.
And you've seen it. Zeph loves his clemency. It's great. He uses it really well too.
I don't think it has much of a use in a lot of fights. In 2-target fights, it can be very good, or like prog point situations. Downtime, it can be good too, yeah, now that they've made all the changes. But when it comes to any kind of like typical rotation or defensive change that you might make, you just pretty much never press the button. You're actively discouraged, and nobody has ever taken a paladin clemency. Almost nobody
That's
ever
true.
does that.
Okay, that's fair. It's not like a reason to take
Yeah.
them, but it's just a nice to use.
When the
Yeah.
time comes, you're like, oh man, that's so cool. They'll forget about it in 5 minutes, but it was cool.
Yeah.
I mean, but I wouldn't classify. I mean, yeah, kind of, but not the reason. Like again, it's not the reason why you would take a paladin. Like
Like
they're
for wing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The Veil change to Paladin was way more important than anything.
Yeah, it was. Oh my god, procking Veil was.
That was, they had to
super
use
annoying.
clemency. Everybody, can you clemency yourself there so I don't?
You didn't even have to clemency yourself because it healed you when you healed someone else. You could clemency someone else. and
Yeah.
proc Veil.
That's true. Yeah. So there was, but you still had to. I remember not infrequently seeing the healers ask, "Can you do a clemency there instead?"
No shot.
No, I other than the button, I think Paladin's too big on button bloat. That's about the only thing. Even after the changes, I still think they have just way too like my hotbars on Paladin are fucking dying. Some of that's cover. That's it. Some of that's cover. There's a few other things they could probably do.
Don't get rid of cover.
No.
Sad.
Now, we don't have that much time left in the show, but fortunately, Kio, you've been sprinkling in healer bits here or there. So I guess it's hand in hand. Anytime a tank has to talk about something, the healer has to be part of the discussion, essentially.
Yeah,
So it's just kind of worked out. But you've sprinkled in talking about Scholar 2 target. You've sprinkled in talking about White Mage mitigations, the Aqua Veils, Lilies. Are there any other, I guess, dominant thoughts you want to make sure that you get through with a lot of with the healing role or any of the particular healers?
So it's more of a fear than anything. I feel like we've been drifting away from throughput healing in general. We've sort of been moving more in the direction of just mitigation checks constantly.
Yeah.
Just did we die? And then, we don't have as much of the stuff like in Eden's Gate, the Titan Earthen Fury that applied the dot, where you suddenly had all this throughput healing while you're dancing, and then tumults and stuff like that. We get less and less of that lately, and I think it's really devalued regen healers. And I've seen a lot more double shield these days in various content. I miss the throughput healing, so
The
I'm a
fact
little
that
worried
people,
about that.
the fact that people
Do you-
even want to take double shield healer, I think represents a problem. That
So
should
you-
not
do
be
you miss-
viable. Sorry, continue.
No, you're good. You're good. Do you miss the healing checks?
Well, it's more like I worry about the balance of the game. Like they've clearly wanted to have one shield, one pure healer, but the design is getting a little away from them. Like, for example, one of the things regen healers have is really, really powerful AoE. So like, for example, if you run double shield in DSR, you're suddenly going to find yourself having issues with the meteor check because you didn't realize just how much the regen healers are carrying that, because they do a lot of AoE damage. And then like with double shield, suddenly it's a struggle. And but the less, if that's very fight specific, whereas on other fights like double shield is exceptionally good in other parts of other fights. Top has a pretty good dynamic with double shield. But yeah, I want to see more throughput in general healing. I miss soft and rages, Brute Justice's spin, J waves, and stuff like that has always been a lot of fun. The panicked raid calls during like those where people are trying to like rapidly coordinate mit across the waves. Like, what do you have now? What's coming up? What do we have? While we're like taking increasingly more damage, is one of the more fun things to do on healer. So I hope they bring that back more often.
I really like those sections too, because when you start like timelining it, you can start then saying, oh, press your button at like this time in it, or like at this part of the cast bar, and it'll cover multiple hits. Because I remember when we were doing E12S Kio, we hit the final phase, saw in rage, and we sat down and we worked out a mit plan, which we would turn into a macro that we press when we make it to that phase.
Yeah.
But the key parts of that were also press your mitigation at this part of the cast bar, and you will now cover 2 hits, or at least every bit of damage going into the next hit, and stuff like that. And that is really nice, while also having, like, for the party, and it's also really nice for the healer to actually have something to do. Because there's almost always, in those plans, going to be a spot that is lighter than others. And then that's where that regen healer can start coming in as well, not only keeping the party alive throughout everything else, but knowing that section, and then burst healing everybody right before that big hit that is going to hit harder than normal.
It's actually the first time I think we've had an entire expansion without one of those. I think E12 was the last time we had a soft and rage like that. I don't think that Endwalker had anything, and on any of the raids that was like that. The closest thing, no, I can't even think of one.
Closest thing would be P8S final boss, final phase.
Dominion, kind of,
Yeah, Dominion with like the dot.
Curtain Call was kind of nice in phase 2
Curtain
of
Call was
P4.
great.
It was a little bit.
It's not quite the damage frequency throughput that you're thinking about, but given how long of a period it was over, it kind of achieves it. It just doesn't achieve it in a kind of short burst of throughput. It's really more about like that. I think it's like 45 seconds across both curtain calls or something of throughput.
Yeah, the nice thing is it was a unique spin with the players having control of when the damage comes out. So
yeah,
but yeah, I agree that was pretty close to a soft and rage.
That's my favorite, like in Rage in the whole like final sequence in the whole expansion is Curtain Call.
Yeah,
I think Current Call was great. That has so much expression from like from pretty much your entire party of going through the whole mechanic, putting up your mitigation to help everyone out, going through breaking at the right time, making sure you're watching your healers so that they're actually healing before you do your thing. As a tank, there's almost always a point where someone's lower than normal for whatever reason because of how heals and everything propagate outward. Hit them with the TBN or whatever your mid is so they don't die to the next one. Everybody gets to participate to some degree.
Even just the
great.
tanks, like, because when the tank goes to break their tether, doing a swap to keep the boss in the center, even though it's a huge hitbox, still a potential thing of the boss like shifting over a little bit.
That in our world first clear that fight,
He had to
we
throw in the
didn't
world
swap.
first.
I wanted to point out the fact that it was early on.
Yeah.
That's why I got to point that out. That it's like early on before we knew all that, or like thought about it. We ended up. I go to break my tether, and we didn't even talk or think about a tank swap. The whole boss moved, and thankfully the group kept going and everybody dodged correctly. But that's like another one of those things with that mechanic. It's just if you don't do that swap, the whole boss is going to move, and now everybody's spots are all kind of messed up in how they're dodging. And also, they have to make sure that they're not breaking their tether at the same time while trying to dodge everything. I love that mechanic. It's so good.
Love
Add more of it.
What? Once again, the fight design is really what this is all about.
Yeah.
Less than kits, it's
Yeah.
more about how do they design these fights, and do they include the elements that make all the jobs feel like they're utilizing their kit well. Like another example, we're talking about like things that I want to see happen. Buttons like Liturgy of the Bell are in many of these fights really feel bad to use. And it would be nice if that was more of a standard redesign, that they have multi-hit busters in mind for things like Panheima and Liturgy and other multi-hit mitts. It just feels really bad when you have to use it on like a single hit. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Go ahead.
it's like we have all these tools to handle the previous raid design, but they move away from it. I really don't understand that sometimes. Like they're giving us the things to handle the stuff they made in the past.
Yeah, like on the flip side, it's like you bring a Sage into T now and use Panheima on the BJCC Enrage, Soft Enrage, and you're just like, this is amazing. This button is so good here.
And then, where else is it? I mean, Panheima is great in a lot of places, but like, it does feel like it was made for the way things were done before. You very rarely take 5 hits back to back in such a way that Panheima can fully propagate.
Even if you use like 3 or 4, that's good enough. It feels amazing. It's just, I feel like they don't include that as a standard thing as much as they should in pretty much every fight. Like you could just throw in a couple multi hits sprinkled throughout fights, and it wouldn't really change anything. I think it'd be more satisfying.
Yeah, and then you go into easy content, you Panheima just so the tank has 5 shields.
Yeah. Panheima on the wall-to-wall pulls in a dungeon.
Yeah, you're just like, here, it's just a second Heima at this point. You're like, hey, you know what? That's the most satisfying way to use it. That's the most satisfying way to use it. It is what it is. Let's see. So we've got the throughput, but I mean, I'm sure there's something job wise that like we haven't brought up healing. I refuse to believe you're that content with everything that isn't Astro, or mostly just apprehensive about Astro. There's got to be some white mage woes or something in there.
White mage woes?
I guess anything that you feel like in the heal, because we just spent so much time on tank and we're getting close to the 2-hour mark. So I'm like condensing my questions into something more general. There's a lot to talk about with tanks though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of a open-ended. It's kind of
very
a
open-ended.
question.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the big changes they made in Endwalker was healing ranges, specifically Cure 3. Got really big and easy to use. I guess I feel like all that stuff just made it a lot less interesting. I kind of wish AoE healing stayed. I don't know. I guess I miss the stack up. I miss the stack up for Cure 3 calls. Those were fun.
They made everything bigger. Even like our mitigation, our raid wide stuff, Scholar Bubble, like why
Asylum.
God,
I get why they did it, but it feels that is kind of like a byproduct of how the fight design has been as of late. Because before, when you're moving around the room a bunch or from place to place, actually placing things correctly and getting in the right spot was very important. And sometimes you can only hit a subset of the party. And then you have to choose, who am I going to pick? Now you really don't have to do that as much. And I feel like that's kind of a shame. But once again, we don't move around the part of the room as much. It's very rare that you're on one side, the healer's on the other, and you are in a situation where you have to top everybody and get everybody up to like speed with things. That doesn't happen as often.
You know, it was funny.
It still does, but
you mentioned earlier about the targeted mitts with the healers and with the tanks as well. It technically only hitting a subset of the party, it would be almost not the least impactful, but like having a soil in one place and then targeting mitt on the people who can't make it to the soil because of the mechanic. It's like we're more equipped to do so, like handle the smaller soils and stuff like that nowadays.
Yeah, I was going to say a good example is we recently went back and we did some promise, or I recently did some promise and doing diamond dust, spiral pierce. Back in Prague, that was like a whole thing, right? Where like there's a knockback that happens, and then there's big damage. The knockback does big damage, and then there's a subsequent. You need to be full HP for this next hit, or you die. Check, right? It short one after the other. And so there was originally like a immune the knockback, stay in the middle, catch all the healing, then stretch the tethers so you don't die. And it was like a whole big raid coordination thing where you didn't go out early or you would die to the damage because you didn't catch the heals. And that just doesn't exist anymore. With modern day 90 kits, it's so easy to top everyone, even if they go to the wall quickly. It's very different than it used to be. Much easier to heal people from a distance, and trivializes a lot of the raid coordination that we used to have, and I miss that.
And I have a thing to say about that, because in Shadowbringers, I was very proud of my Curing Waltz optimization as Dancer. Now when I press it, I go, why did I do that? Why even bother? I'll just use it as another second wind at some point in the middle of like some other random mechanic. Who cares? No one cares if I stack my Curing Waltz anymore. No one cares.
I was doing something similar. I was dancing recently. It's like, man, I could do so much here, and it doesn't feel like it does anything.
yeah.
It's an indom coming from your DPS as long as everyone's stacked, and nobody gives a shit because all the heals are all over the place now, so nobody ever puts themselves in a position for Curing Waltz even.
All the ranges are so big that healing is much easier now.
But not Curing Waltz's range.
Or improv.
Or improv.
If you look at the way the old sizes were for everything, that affected how usually the whole party handled a mechanic. If you look, Kio, at our old Uwu clear, our first one, at the very end of the fight, there's the whole Titan and everything with the way the lands into the stack mechanic. And you put down a Scholar bubble at the time, which was still the small bubble. It's interesting when I see that is because the whole group stops at the end of the bubble when we're doing the way of the land. The moment they get to the end of that bubble, nobody moves past it because they all know they're about to take some damage, and they're going to just take that small movement, get to the end of it, and then dodge back the other way into the bubble. That is like a consideration we would never make now.
Yeah, it covers the whole arena. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, you just have the mitt.
I don't like it at all.
You want to know what's a really jarring one? You talked about like the really large soils, the really large asylums. If you have effects on and you watch a sage do their AoE when it just blasts outward, that's whenever I'm on sage and I press the bubble, it just like encompasses like everything within like a 5-mile radius with the animation. It's one of the most jarring looking things I've ever seen.
Yeah, it really, with the power of that button too, like we didn't really talk about it, but like Soil and Caracoli both got, Caracoli got buffed because Soil got buffed, and I think it was Shadowbringers to have the crazy regen with it too.
Yeah.
So it's now like, even if you're not mitting anything, it's an optimal heal button. And it just makes everything so much easier when you have this just like really overpowered button that does everything for you. This removes a lot of your agency and coordination.
I wonder if tanks or healers are going to get it. Like, when I think of buttons that are like that, Kio, I don't even think of a healer. I think of Shake on Warrior.
Yeah.
They just seem obsessed with adding effects to it. I wonder if we get that with any of the other. Like, I wonder if Soil gets another thing, somehow another thing added to it, like a pulsing shield every few seconds you're in.
I would love that actually.
It's-
Well, of course you love it, but still, it's like insane how strong. Like, can they really make these things any stronger?
Well, the cool thing with Shake is that it has the trade-off of you can kill yourself with it. Like you can just end. You'd be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna shake the cannon in top P6.
Yeah.
But
That's
I just
funny.
shook off all my buffs. Like that. I like that you have the ability to buff it and add like a little bit of an extra effect. But if you lose something in the process, that would be nice. If
I
the
like
healers
that.
had something too.
Don't take that as a criticism. Please keep that at the game.
Yeah,
yeah,
I was gonna
please
say
do that.
after you said that, now it's gonna be like it's gonna scale with your buffs, but not take them. That's the next.
Oh no.
I always thought stuff like that was interesting. You know, the whole like divine veil on Paladin not applying to himself, and like the trade offs that would have. I like trade offs. I think they make it more interesting. If you need to mitt both tanks and use veil, then you'd have to shield the Paladin specifically to get the same value. I think that makes mitt more interesting to coordinate, which I think is part of the fun of playing healer and tank. I think that's the most fun part is coordinating your buttons.
Well, speaking of most interesting thing about tank and healer, we are coming up and we're past the 2-hour mark. So I want to leave a kind of another open-ended kind of tail end section of the podcast. Is there any thought or any hope or any bit of detail that we didn't get to that you have in terms of hopes for Dawntrail? Or if you would like to reiterate one from earlier, feel free.
Trick attack.
Not even about
was
tank
on
or
buff.
healer. Not just
No,
not
it
even-
affects it affects my enjoyment of
We should have
tank.
had you on the. We should have had.
Nope,
you on
it
the
just
melee
affects
show.
my enjoyment of tank and every other tank who plays it. But yeah, I'd actually on that note, I kind of went into this earlier, but I would like to see gearing actually mattering a little bit on both these classes, or roles rather. For tanking, the big gear that you usually care about is your skill speed, because no trick and a couple other things, you typically just go 2.5. For healer, mana you used to care about a little bit. So you would not anymore. Yeah, you used to actually want to stack piety in a few cases. There was even an argument at some point to say, hey, in Prague, give me a piety set for crafted gear, and then give me a DPS set, and you'd mix and match as you needed. And I remember I had one of those, I think I think I had some of that in Titan, where I had a mixture of both. But I had a lot of piety at some point, and that was kind of cool. And that you get to make those trade-offs, but now you just don't. But I think it's like this with all the classes now. Gearing has gotten kind of boring. Tenacity is also a forgotten stat.
You can call it might be a hot take, but I think ever since they added direct hit, it's been pretty boring.
No, that's not a hot take at all, Kio. I can promise you that.
Not saying I miss accuracy. I don't think it was a good stat either, but I do think gearing has gotten worse than direct hit. So.
Accuracy was a great stat for healing.
No, the fuck.
I mean, not healing. Sorry, it was a great stat for gearing and like actually having options, but it is bad from a player experience.
Accuracy as a stat feels bad, but yeah, it made gearing interesting because you had to construct these sets that met the threshold, but you could usually move a few pieces around to meet the threshold, and it made it interesting. Like based on what you had access to, changed your gearing, which was interesting. Yeah. I think that's what Sindalf means.
Yeah, and you can make a different set for every fight too, if you really wanted to.
Like, oh, I picked up the raid helmet from raid today. That means I can swap out this piece for the crafted set to meet my accuracy cap. You know that like.
I hated having to fucking think about that, honestly.
Yeah, that's probably why that's one of the reasons they most likely got rid of it. Most of the player base doesn't want to think about it. It feels bad to get a piece of loot from a raid, can't use it.
It feels bad to fucking miss.
It does.
You have like one singular miss. Even
Have more
though,
accuracy
like,
than Sly.
I can tell you I've experienced this again in like my top prog, because the servers were still having problems on Aether for certain players, so I was dropping packets throughout the whole thing, or at least the server wasn't responding to my GC. So I got to experience that again, where I'd hit a button and then my next two parts of my combo would not go through. So
Oh,
it was
you
the
got,
same
you got your
thing.
input eaten.
Yeah, so it's the same thing
Yeah.
of when you miss your one on your back when we had accuracy. It felt awful. And I don't want and nobody really wants that to come back at all, like accuracy, but it did serve a purpose. And I would like to see something bring that purpose back.
Chat brings up a good point. You don't have to worry about whether or not double down crit if it just doesn't hit at all.
True. Maybe they make it RNG. They give it a 50% accuracy rate. That'll be the change.
That's toxic.
You can make it triple down to shoot more bullets, but the problem is that they're gonna say it spreads more, so you have a higher chance of failing it, but it does more damage.
Yeah, it's a fucking Pokemon ability. I was thinking the same thing. That's a fucking Pokemon ability right there. You go into fucking competitive and you gamble it all in the 50-50 and you miss every time. But they get theirs every time. Oh man. Kio, any last, I know I already went from open-ended to open-ended, but
I have nothing in particular. Just I reiterate that I'm hoping for something to do during the low healing sections. I feel like that's the one thing that we're really lacking in the healer kit. That everything else feels really good right now, especially the single target mitts they added. I think the designs the 1.5 cast time was a dream. That was so good for quality of life. So that's, I think, the last thing that's left in the healer kit that needs fixing is the downtime boredom.
All right. Well, Sindalf.
What about the fact that you don't have to ever press regen on a DPS player? You want that fixed too?
Huh?
You imagine the regens remember the regens that you do during something like orbs in A8S on at the beginning of the fight, because you didn't want to push too much damage at some point. So you would just regen your entire party and find ways to make them safer. And now that's just not even an interaction that you make.
I
guess.
I mean, we're under the assumption that we should. Well, I feel like it's a non-issue because like it's more niche, and we're always under the assumption that we shouldn't be fucking taking extra damage any fucking way. So it's more of a like, I felt like that's more of a just in case, situation.
I don't. Yeah. I think for a long while now there has never been unless you're strictly holding damage, you never regen a DPS. There hasn't been since a Realm Reborn.
Yeah, and I'm mentioning that's kind of a problem because that was going to be my next thing. Is like, when's the last time you actually pressed that button on a DPS player?
I don't think it's a problem. I mean, I've pushed it on DPS players that have like debuffs that do damage or a dot on them. That still happens. Like sizzle beam and
that's a Heaven's Ward skill, Kio. I don't think you can use that as an example now.
I know, but I'm just saying, like,
example.
There's other things like, okay, what's a more modern one?
Give me an Endwalker.
You can't say Guardian's Fire dot either. You can't jump back like 7 years and be like, yeah, I still do it.
I don't remember a specific fight, but I'm sure there's like sludge debuffs when you step in a puddle of something.
There was a natural alignment. Someone mentioned in chat.
Nisi's natural alignment. Okay.
Yeah, that is probably the best one and one of the only ones I can actually think of is like that put a dot on two specific players.
Criterion.
There's situations, just not very often, but it does happen. It still serves its purpose of just like if you need to heal one target a lot and you're gonna have to GCD heal them, not just lilies or something like that, then regens is the best option.
Yeah, I mean, even that same situation also extends to tanks, because if you're having to put a regen up there, that also is like, man, that's a prime TBN candidate whenever they took their damage.
Why not both?
Fortunately,
this has been a very interesting show in contrast with the other roles, because when we talk about the other roles, it was mainly, what do y'all want out of your kit? Here is it leaned more towards, fight design. A little bit out of your kit, but it was more so fight design should reflect this for the kit.
Well, yeah, fundamentally our buttons on healer and tank are much more focused on handling what the game throws at us. You know, it's like if I'm sitting on a dummy, like more than half of my kit does not get used, and there's nothing to say. A DPS is using pretty much their full kit minus like 2 buttons on a dummy, so they can talk more about isolated scenarios. But for a tank and healer, our enjoyment of the content is very much based on the content itself and what they're throwing at us. So that's why we have hopes for encounter design, which is I don't have anything to say about that.
And I'll hope for Palisade so I can help.
Oh my God. And that's going to be our show, everyone. Thank you guys so much for fucking coming out. We really, thank you, Kio. Thank you, Sindalf, for coming out. We really appreciate your takes, your hot takes.
Before this started, somebody said, I'm just here for the Sindalf hot takes.
We got one.
Well, they got one with the timers.
With blood
Get rid of
weapon,
them.
yep.
I mean, no, wait, no. Bring the timers back. That's what I'm saying.
He can't even get
Bring
his
them
own
back.
hot take right. You already forgot it. Sindalf exposed? Doesn't actually want timer? Yeah, I appreciate it as well. Yeah, we had to cram in both supports because in 6 days, there'll be still some speculation. We don't usually get everything from the Combat Live letter, but significantly more discussion versus speculation.
Yeah.
And so I hope everyone's planning on being up bright and early, 4 a.m. Pacific.
Yeah. I'm going to be up for that much. I'm going to hate it, but I'm going to be up for it.
It's gonna be
so-
a long one.
And then we have several weeks to do the exact same thing, but discuss it.
We got several weeks to just look for leaks from the media tour.
God.
Gonna be finding the one media outlet that went, refreshing all their like links for all their jobs by accident, for waiting for someone to accidentally upload them again.
God, I've hated that in previous years where I've been invited. It's nothing worse than people coming into stream and being like, "This is a topic." And I'm like, "No."
Can't talk about it.
The fuck was I there for?
It's really not. It's really not a topic. That was terrible.
I feel like isn't that like worse for you? Because like if I found something on like because a website put something up, I can talk about it, but you can't because you're under NDA.
That's media for you.
That kind
You
of
know,
actually would suck a lot.
it's never in the past been a free pass to be like, oh well, fuck it then. That's never how it's worked ever historically. Because some of us want to maintain a professional relationship.
I mean that's
Exactly.
Yeah.
And be good boys.
Yeah.
You could hit people with the fake leaks though.
I wouldn't do that.
No.
Tell them to bring accuracy back. Bring back the old Dark Knight leaks from Realm Reborn. The ones that had like accuracy minus 10%.
I will say the funny ones are the ones that are really obviously made up that get posted to Reddit the entire time. Like the really obvious ones, it'll be like a 3000 potency, like off global that's on like a 10-second cooldown or some shit like that. And it'll be like my inner edge for Dark Knight or something crawling in my skin, like some really dumb shit. People get really funny and creative with those in the time. Yeah, Media Tour is also starting in 5 days. That's another thing. That's we'll probably hear about it at the Combat Live letter. They've always talked about it at the Combat Live letter before, like briefly, just like here's underway, here's where we are right now, kind of deal.
Yeah.
So
That's exciting.
yeah,
I'm very excited for it.
I'm sure you are, Sindalf. Anyway, that is going to be a wrap for this show. Don't forget, everyone, again, 4 a.m. Pacific for the Combat Live letter. Our next show will be on Friday, the day following that. And, so I may not be able to tell. I actually got a notification that on that day, the 17th, not the 16th, they're upgrading my region's internet, and thus there may be outages. So I don't know if I won't know if I'm going to be stable that day or not. It's either Saturday's show or I just locally record while streaming and we say fuck it if anything happens is the other option. And that way we still do the Friday show. It still goes up on YouTube. It's still the same thing. and we just say fuck it if there's any problem. Oh wait, no, what am I talking about? I wouldn't be able to be on Discord if I. That literally doesn't make any fucking sense.
Use your phone.
I'm not using my fucking phone.
Nah.
To try to run stream and Discord and everything at like a decent quality.
Nah. Uploads ain't it.
That's when you start breaking out the cooking.
No. What is? All right, I'm done. Sindalf's not helping right now. Yeah, so it might be safer to do a Saturday at noon show next week, Sly.
Yeah.
I think we should do that. I think we should commit to that now.
I'm committed.
All right, there you go. All right. With that, thank you again to both of you for joining. Why don't you do the usual outro stuff, where they can find you, name, what you're doing, all that stuff. I'll start with you, Kio.
Well, my my Twitter's on the stream overlay, I believe.
Yep.
_ Kio _. I don't post very much, but I'm there. Yeah, and you can also find me on the Whoops and Happy stream every once in a while during raid.
This is a good outro.
Yeah.
It's about all there is to it. I knew it was going to be short, and I know Sindalf's isn't going to be much longer either.
Yeah. Also, my Twitter's there as well. Sindalf on Twitter. But I also occasionally stream on Twitch under the same name. Usually only on weekends as of right now. Maybe it might change going into Dawntrail. Who knows? But yeah, come say hi if you feel like it. And thanks for having me on.
Thanks for taking the time. Sly, you know the drill.
You can find me at twitch.tv/Sly, aka Gray Fox, Twitter, Sly, aka Gray Fox, youtube.com/Velvet Room. Dawntrail wait. Next week, Read Only Memories Neurodiver. Maybe Chicken Police. Possibly.
Chicken
And then of course
balls?
there's a visual novel game called murder mystery game called Chicken Police.
Okay.
It's about chickens who are detectives.
Okay.
And, like
That could be cool.
Really
Yeah,
fun.
pretty cool.
It was really cool. The first one was really cool. Again, the wait for SMT5 Vengeance, which we got the complete guide on all the quality of life yesterday, and did a video on that. Man, it's some good shit. And it's going to be some good shit in June. I only have 2 weeks for it. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me.
And for me, honestly, not much going on, man. I'm finishing up all my relics. I'm almost done with Eureka, and then Anima Weapon will be shortly after that in terms of 14 goals. I got to finish working through 2.2 of HSR as well. And the only other thing for me this month is Thousand Year Door, which I've never played. I've never played Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. I've only watched speedruns of it occasionally. So highly recommended experience. So that's a probable thing. That's on the 23rd, I think it is. So that would be pretty cool. Yeah. Other than that, yeah, just wait for Dawntrail for me. Chill. I'm just chilling till all the news pops up and YouTube is busy, and I'm sure from next week on, after whatever we learn, it's just video after video after video. And raid, of course. We've been raiding. I have raid in 3 hours. Less than.
I'm also supposed to raid in 3 hours, but I don't think we are.
As the Fizz ranged, I always just kind of hope we aren't.
I usually hope we are, but that's the tank.
I'm just bored, man. Just bored. We're in Promise now too, so everyone's just waiting for my call outs, just for fucking memory's sake. Just like, say the thing, Happy. Say the thing. Say in tight left and right. Say groups.
I just want you to think, Happy. How are you going to feel about doing the exact same practice 2 years from now?
That's why I don't want to think about it. Everyone was mad that we weren't doing My Brambles when we went into Umbra. I'm like, we're not doing My Brambles. We're not doing this. It's not happening. It's not. That's not even My Brambles. It's Pharaoh's. I just got the credit. It's not fair. Same thing happened with Phoenix. We took Momo and Stall strat, and then they called it Happy Oji-san Fountain of Fire in JP. Same fight. You know, the current Delta strat in top was our prog strat, and it was originally called Happy Oji-san Delta for like a day. And then Theo went and was like, can you rename it to Awk? And now it's Sauce because Sauce just has all the standardized ones.
It should be called Awk because I don't think it's a good strat. It's awkward. So it
Awk?
should have been called Awk.
Awk. It's better than the other week one strats that were out. Man, I remember the very first strats that popped up with like people northwest and like breaking off like northeast and south. And I remember all that. That was chaos.
I love the strat we came up with.
I was gonna
thought
say-
it was very good and intuitive.
It's been a
the
while
other
since
day.
I've heard the Sindalf propping up the Delta strat we came up with.
I will prop that one up because it just makes sense.
I like that
just
Kio
makes
doesn't
sense
seem
at
to
the
be
end.
sharing that exact thought.
I mean, it's a good strat. It's a good strat. It's just, man, I'm tired of fighting that fight. Everyone always disagrees.
No, during our
is what it
read
is.
clears, there were one or two people who says like I've done this before. It is better.
Oh, nice. I don't get that reaction when I show for it. They go like, no, let's just do PF. Like, okay.
I couldn't have known it would be the PF strat. It wasn't even, again, I got credit. I'm not the one who came up with it. So this just happens. I'm not trying to do this. I apologize. Well, I look forward to it in Dawntrail all over again. With that, we're going to go into a short post show. Thank you again to all of our sponsors for enjoying the show. It'll be on YouTube tomorrow. It'll be on podcast formats tomorrow, audio only tomorrow, all that good stuff. But for now, we're going to sign off. Like I said, short post show. So thank you again to our guests for joining. Thank you to all of you in the chat for joining. And we'll see you next week. Until then, I bid you adieu. Bye-bye.
See you next week.
If I had remembered to change the outro, I'd have changed to that scene already. And I made the outro and didn't change to it. And that's
Working
why.
on it.
Yeah, no, hold on.
Working
There it
on
is.
it.
Yeah, I made it
There
2
you go.
seconds before the show started. And now we're done. Okay.
Professional streamer, by the way.
Yeah.